So there were the first expulsions in 1948, the first ethnic cleansing, according to Ilan Pappé, an Israeli historian. He calls it an ethnic cleansing based on Plan Dalit. Then there was the ethnic cleansing of 1967, less severe, but another bunch of Palestinians got thrown out. And what had happened was that the Arabs had failed in 1948. They had been saved by the Americans in 1956, when I think it was the Eden government here. Britain, France, in partnership with Israel, tried to take over the Suez Canal militarily.
Yes, didn't work.
And the Americans said absolutely not, and partnered with the Russians to sort of put the final nail in the coffin of the British and French empires. And the result of that was the beginning of the rise of a popular resistance by the Palestinians from wherever they were against Israel. And this was called the Fidaiyin, those who would give their lives for the cause. And this really escalated after 1967, because the size of the Arab defeat in 1967 discredited the Arab governments enormously.
Yes, now Lebanon was a party to that.
Lebanon was not part in 1967. Lebanon did not fight in 1967. Okay. It did not fight in 1956. It barely fought in 1948. Okay. And there was a quip by I think it was either Prime Minister or Defense Minister at the time, Rabin, during perhaps his first premiership. He was asked, which division shall we send to Lebanon? And he said the musical band. So the Lebanese army was in a weak state.
I mean, that must have been a conflict in itself. If you've got a country which is half and half almost effectively at this point, especially after these waves of Palestinian immigration, it must have been problematic inside Lebanon that there is this, 5 armies going against Israel in 1967, and yet, it was
disastrous for Lebanon.
Yes.
Because you have to understand that throughout the Israeli-Arab conflict, the Muslims of Lebanon, Sunni and Shia, fully sided with the Arabs, much more so than the Sunnis, which is important because the Sunnis at the time held much more power than the Shia. The Shia at the time, they were the most backwards community in Lebanon. They had been under the Ottomans barely tolerated for 400 years. The Ottomans hated Shia Islam because of what they believe is its heresies. My view is that, yes, it is heretical. And in a way, its heresies make it closer to Christianity. But that's a different conversation for another time. And they were really quite enfeebled and led by a bunch of traditional families whose only focus was enriching themselves. So the Palestinians played a big role in this, because as the Fidaiyin movement emerged, the Muslims who had sided with the Palestinians on a regional perspective, or from a regional perspective, thought that now they had an armed ally whom they could use to contend against the Lebanese army, whose officers were mostly Christian.
Yeah. And again, I see the parallels to the current situation, where in London you can often have hundreds of thousands marching through London,
yes,
supporting Palestine, while you've got the British state, which is, the Muslims, they just don't sign up to the military.
No.
A handful of them do.
Well, more Muslims joined Islamic State than in a couple of years' time. People say it as though the absolute number matters. No. Over the last sort of 20, 30 years, the British Army has ended up with a total of maybe 500 Muslims. Over the course of 2 or 3 years, perhaps more than 2,000 Muslims joined Islamic State. So the time factor suggests that if things were to kick off, the ability of the Muslims to mobilize is going to be enormous.
Yes.
And you just have to see the number of Muslims going out of a mosque on an average Friday to see that.
And this would have been the situation in Lebanon in around 1967, that they weren't in the military, but they were militant.
They were militant.
Supporting
yes.
Palestine.
And so you had another thing that has parallels here in Britain, which is the gradual failure of the state to enforce the law. So one big problem was this. Starting about 64, but really escalating after 1967, the Palestinians began conducting operations against Israel out of Lebanese territories.
Right.
And the Israelis...
Not officially sanctioned.
Not
just
officially
with
sanctioned.
Militant support.
Just with support from the leadership of the Muslim political establishment and pretty much all of the Muslims who weren't in frontline villages
Yes.
that would be targeted by the Israelis.
So
Because
is this
Israelis,
the emergence of Hezbollah, or does that come later?
No. That comes much later.
Okay.
That comes 15, 16 years later, 17 years later. The issue was that the Israelis would retaliate with sort of collective punishment. They just bombed the villages from which the people came, the attackers came. And
Even
there
though
would
they might have been just passing through, effectively.
Even though they might have been passing through.
Right.
And that was them putting pressure on the local community to reject the Palestinians. And that was them putting pressure on the Lebanese state to stop the Palestinians. The Lebanese army tried. But then throughout the late 60s, you would have these battles with the Palestinians and with Palestinian groups, where the key problem was that the country would politically implode if the state took a hard enough stance against the Palestinians, because the Muslim half of the country backed the Palestinians.
Okay,
and wanted
again,
this
is exactly where we are today.
Exactly
where we are today. And
yes.
Keir Starmer has just given, Palestinian statehood, or recognised Palestinian statehood, because he's afraid he cannot go after basically half of his voting base.
Pretty much. So you see this, the way that Islam plays this nefarious role, where so to give you an example, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians, they were all militantly anti-Israel, much more so than the Lebanese, because Lebanon is Christian-led. Up to this day, still has a Christian president, much weaker, but up to this day. They would never tolerate the Palestinians conducting operations out of their territories against Israel, because there would be Israeli retaliation. Except in Lebanon, because in Lebanon, the Muslims in Lebanon saw that as a way of fighting the Christians and weakening the Christians and calling the Christians disloyal. So in Jordan, the Fidaiyin attacks on Israel got to such a problem that there was an actual battle between the Jordanian army and the Fidaiyin on the one side versus Israel, the Karama battle, and then the Jordanian army in what is called Black September in 1970 just wipes out the Palestinian militant presence in Jordan and exercises total control, and nobody dares say anything about it. In Lebanon, if this had been done and the Palestinians had been disarmed, the Lebanese civil war would not have happened. And the subsequent Israeli invasions of 1978 and 1982 would not have happened.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.